Hello, and thank you for tuning in to our December Jobs Talk with Eightfold AI. We'll share some real-time insights on the JOLTS report, the jobs report, and other hot topics around talent today. Grab a cup of hot chocolate and turn down the Mariah Carey. It's December Jobs Report time. Once again, I'm joined by Sania Khan, Eightfold's Chief Economist. How's it going, Sania? Happy Jobs Report Friday.
Hi, Jason. Going well. Crazy morning. Lots of surprises.
Lots of surprises, so let's get right into it. U.S. payrolls rose 199,000 in November, continuing a yearly trend of around 240,000 jobs per month for the year, and around a trend of 200,000 for the last 3 months. Unemployment rate was again at 3.7%, a 4-month low, and correspondingly, the labor force participation rate is the highest it's been in 3 years. Hiring remained relatively steady, but one thing we're always interested in is what does that mean for job openings? And in the reports that came out, we saw that job openings fell to their lowest level since March 2021. This is something we've been discussing as a trend over these last few jobs report chats, as we think organizations are currently reevaluating the work at hand while also learning about the capabilities of generative AI and automation. I think, with the world of work changing so fast, HR leaders are increasingly hiring with an eye towards the future versus just focusing on what the need is today. So they're scrutinizing these job openings and these job descriptions and their headcount. And as the future isn't yet unveiling itself to us and we're learning about all these new capabilities, that's where we're seeing some of these job postings potentially come off the board or get scrutinized or redesigned for the future. What are you seeing in your analysis, Sania?
Absolutely, Jason. I think you really got it. Hiring has slowed, job openings have decreased as seen in the October JOLTS report. So that's from the month of October. But then we see in the November jobs report, which is for the month of November, perhaps October was just an anomaly and it's a discrepancy there with such a hot jobs labor market and potentially a slowdown in October. And what I think is going on with employers is that they want to keep the workforce that they have at hand and they want to upskill them. Perhaps they want to, instead of laying them off, perhaps put them in a different department, reallocation of resources here. They want to slow down their hiring. They want to decrease the job openings that they have because of a tight labor market. And I think that really means October's cooling of the labor market fears should be abated and labor market continues to draw in workers pretty heftily, pretty strongly in the last labor market report, today's labor market report.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about that we were anticipating as a trend was part of this is how we're getting work done today is different than how people have done it in the past. And we saw a little bit of a wave starting to generate, and maybe now we're starting to see that play out in some of the data. When you mention these trends around maximizing their existing workforce and reskilling and redeploying and trying to make the most use out of people that are already on staff, that's addressing work in a much different way. And we've talked about, a lot of these reports are really focusing on, the economics of this and the supply and demand of this. And we're moving, from a historic way of doing this where it's people to jobs to now evaluating skills to work. And I think some of this may be starting to surface and display itself in the data. Don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. I think a good example of this is in healthcare, for example. We saw a reduction in healthcare job openings, and I thought that was really interesting. So I dug a little deeper, and I saw that there was it's interesting because there is a shortfall of clinical professionals right now,
Mm.
specifically nurses. And so, how could there be a decrease in job openings? And I think that perhaps HR professionals in the healthcare field are looking at or taking a skills focused approach as something that we at Eightfold talk about quite a bit too, where you look at what a job entails and you look at all the skills that are needed in a nurse's day to day and break them down. So, for example, if you take all of the non-nursing tasks, like administrative duties or housekeeping duties, you can put those aside. You can either automate those or you can move them to other roles, like you can upskill a phlebotomist to do those roles. And then nurses can concentrate on their core competencies and really work at the highest level that they should be. And I think
So I
that's a
think
really
it's
good
interesting.
example.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
so
Okay.
interesting because earlier in the year, when we partnered with the Global Workforce Intelligence Project, we did that specific report on healthcare, and
Yeah.
one of the ways that we saw to address the shortage wasn't just recruiting or retention or redeploying; it was also redesigning, because when you look at it at a skills level, there was a ton of work that was being done that wasn't nursing, right? So we've talked about, could that be a secondary role that becomes this new title or this new role in an organization, or could this be something that is automated? I just saw an article this week to talk about, could it be done by contractors or gig workers, right? And we know that they're tracked differently than how this data is collected and reported in these reports. So I think, we've been kind of on the cusp of seeing this or anticipating this trend, and to your point, we're starting to see it in the data. How about other industries? Were there other industries that caught your attention in the data that came out?
Yeah, I believe the government sector also saw a lead in job additions. Manufacturing also saw some modest gains, particularly in manufacturing. That's an interesting case because we saw a 4.9% wage growth in the non-supervisory roles in manufacturing. And I think that's, if wages go up for a sector, then you know that there's high labor demand and low labor supply, and there's a mismatch. So you're going to be wanting to entice them with higher wages. And I think that makes sense. We might not be quite on the semiconductor boom yet, but I think if it's not here already, it's coming. And specifically, today's jobs report show that there's a 0.6% increase in semiconductor manufacturing jobs. So this is an area that we are expecting to see growth in. I know all of the big players, and then Intel, Amazon, Google, Microsoft are also building out their AI chips manufacturing projects. So that's going to be interesting to see.
And part of this was that we also did a research on the semiconductor industry, and we talked about one of the only ways to address the shortfall was reskilling and upskilling with all of these adjacent skills and learnability. So now that we're seeing this take shape in openings and opportunity, it's all the more time to put those kind of skills understanding and skills mapping to action, right?
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be looking at this stuff.
One of the things that I'm interested in is when we talked about, the labor force participation rate is the highest it's been in 3 years. When the jobs reports and the JOLTS reports come out, you get some data around the labor force participation and the different groups in the labor force. And we've talked about it here a little bit. What did you see today?
So the ratio for prime aged adults, the employment to population ratio specifically, that rose to 80.7%. And that really means there's other people that are on the sidelines of the labor market that are coming to work. And that's driven, I think they're driven by the increase in wages where wages are rising faster than the rate of inflation. And as overall inflation is now on the downward trend, right? We're all happy about that. The Fed's happy about that. So wages are still continuing on despite real wages, we can call them, that brings more people into the workforce. And particularly, we saw teenagers really had an increase in this month of the unemployment rate decreasing for them.
I wish someone would tell my teenagers. Let's get them to work. What about other groups? We've tracked kind of the impact of women and the employment rate of women. Are we seeing anything happening there as we look for what happened in these reports?
Yeah, just overall, if you look at women age 25 to 54, they're at an all-time high for labor force participation, which is just great news. Hopefully that continues. Wages in general are growing faster than inflation. I think that's drawing more people in. And we're in a pretty strong labor market. There's on a whole 4.7 million more jobs than there were pre-pandemic, and we've been below 4% unemployment for 2 years, and that's uh, almost 2 years. That's 22 months. So that's the longest it's ever been since 1969. Um, we also saw consumers are pretty happy. Consumer sentiment grew by 8 points. So that is driven from an optimism about inflation going down. So overall, we're in a pretty strong, still strong labor market. October was a little dip of a cool, but then again, you have to take into account how month to month there could be different variations because it's such a short time frame. So overall, looking at the larger picture instead of the months is important.
How about what's in the news? Was there anything that you saw in the news this week that relates to some of this? I know, there's a ton of things that are gathering people's attention. What caught your attention this week?
So interesting. There was an article from the Wall Street Journal that talked about how African American employees are not getting promoted at the same rates as they were in the last few years. So they're back to the same levels as 2019. And I think that brings up DEI concerns. Is that something HR leaders and the C-suite might be putting on the back burner? Is it because like why is it on the back burner? Are there other things more pressing? And that's something I think we should still be continuing to talk about. I know that DEI officers had really short tenures at companies, and perhaps that has something to do with it. If there's constantly churn in that role, perhaps they can't fulfill their visions. And I think that's something that we should look into a little bit more.
It's interesting. We've been talking about some of these trends, and now we're seeing them come through in the data. Another topic that came up over the last few months or so was organizations changing their benefits to try to support and attract, a variety of workers, especially workers that are more senior in their career. What did you hear this week around some programs or some impacts of more senior workers in the workforce?
Yes, I just read something about how, um, well, let me retract. First, I did a webinar with Josh Bersin earlier this week, and
Oh,
I
wow.
talked a little bit about how uh, there's going to be an indefinite labor supply shortage, right? Because people are retiring. Um, we have this strong generation of workers that are 55 and over, and they are going to be leaving the workforce. They did leave during the pandemic, and then we didn't see as many people come back to the workforce that we would have. And the fertility rates in the United States and other advanced countries are pretty low as well. So we're not the people that are retiring, we're not making up for it with younger generations coming into the workforce. So this is going to be a larger problem, and I think the solution to that is really looking at skills-based workforce planning. But to get back on your question is these older workers, I've seen studies that just came out from the Center for Retirement and Research that said that there's no negative productivity association with a worker getting older, and they're not a drain on profitability. And one of the white papers that we have out on Eightfold's website that I worked on really shows how these older workers can be an asset to a company, and this statistics say that as well. But really, if you are seeing a labor shortage, perhaps the key to solving for that labor shortage is bringing back those older workers and or valuing them for the skills that they really do have, and promoting them and upskilling them in the areas that they might be lacking. But they are an asset to an organization, and they should be looked at as them as such.
So that was the exact use case that had come up around organizations re-examining their benefit packages to maybe, start to roll out more programs for things around senior workers, grandparents, all different types of care, right? So one of the things that I learned was, there's a lot of focus around maternity and paternity leave, but there were increasingly organizations that were looking at grandparent leave, because one of the reasons why a lot of workers end up retiring is to go and help with childcare. Right, but if they can take off grandparent leave to maybe take care of some of those first few weeks, those first few months, then maybe you can keep them in the workforce at a different schedule that's more convenient to their work-life balance, but you still need that talent in your organization. So I think all of this is coming to fruition from a lot of the trends we've been seeing over these past few months. You mentioned the webinar with Josh Bersin. He just published that report on the post-industrial age. Which talks a lot about the need for kind of a skills-based approach, especially with the changing demographics in the workforce, right? So
exactly.
I'm glad you had a chance to have that conversation. I'll have to check the recording. For the folks that are listening to the jobs report, I'm sure we'll have the recording on the Eightfold website shortly if it's not there already. That would be great and something to surely check out. Thank you so much for joining me again, Sania. Wonderful to have the conversation and to see all of these conversations start to link and play out in the market, and the advice that this offers to HR leaders who are putting together strategies. The next time we meet, it is hard to already say this, but it'll be in the new year. So I'm sure a lot of people are having strategic discussions as they do planning for the next year. So, hopefully this helps them thinking of some creative ways to address their talent needs going forward. And the next time we meet, we'll see everyone in 2024. Thanks again.
Wow. Crazy. Thank you so much, Jason. Great talking to you, and see everyone in 2024.